Welcome. Hi, I'm Dawn with K-Square Technologies. Welcome to our monthly webinar training series. Today's session is on Microsoft Forms. We encourage you to be actively involved in the training on Forms, and so please share your questions using chat. And we'll make sure that you can find out how to effectively use this application. Now, Microsoft Forms is something that is an online tool. That is, it's available to most Microsoft 365 account users or Office 365. And so it is cloud-based, and we're going to explore those capabilities. But do let us know any questions that you might have or any ways that we can be of help to you. Let's go ahead and continue our look. Here's what we have coming up. We're going to look at how we get started by creating a survey or a poll using Forms. We'll certainly explore the Forms interface as well. How can we share a form? Maybe it's internal, perhaps it's an employee survey, or perhaps it's external to customers, or you want to gather other information about your products or your services. How can you then, once you have shared a form, how can you review those results? What are the options there to be able to look at that data, to be able to effectively make decisions based upon your surveys or your polls? And we'll briefly look at creating a quiz. So although this is something that is probably less likely from a business or commercial application, the distinction between those. So if you are offering any kind of educational services, what that might look like as well. And then how does Forms work with the other Office applications? Specifically, we'll explore that through Outlook and with Teams. So that's our plan, and do let us know how we can be of help to you with that. Very briefly, when we talk about Microsoft Forms, there's two different types of choices that you have, a form and a quiz, which can be a little confusing because the application is called Forms. So hang in there with me. That is, a form is essentially just a survey or a poll. You've probably completed many of these online as well. So this is a great way to survey your employees, your prospects, your customers. And they can remain anonymous depending upon how you want to use that information, or you can gather the specific details as to who is providing you that information. Now, a quiz is also a form, and that's why I said it can be a little confusing. This is often an educational perspective, but also for any type of training purposes, something where you might want to check someone's knowledge. So this could be helpful from an onboarding perspective to make sure that new employees, for instance, have reviewed the information, or that they understand the information that you're sharing with them. So that in addition to a regular form, then what this does is it offers you option to indicate what the correct answers are, track points, and provide input as well. So we'll look briefly at creating a form as we continue this training as well. Let's hop into the interface. As I mentioned, this is cloud-based. And so what that will mean is that we are going to be working with our login through either Microsoft 365, Office 365. Now, you can get to this in a couple different ways. You can go to, in terms of logging in or getting started, you could go to your login. You could also go to forms.microsoft.com. That would be another way. In this case, if I wasn't in Forms, I could go to my little, what we call the waffle in the upper left-hand corner. And from this, then here we have Forms. So this is the interface. We have two options. In the upper left-hand corner here, I could create a new form or a new quiz. My existing forms are displayed here. And we could use those if it's helpful to build a new form, or we could build one from scratch. We also could create or work with templates. So if you want to have a standard look within your organization, that would be another option as well. So for instance, if I wanted to build something off of this survey, we look for the ... So as you probably know, in the Microsoft applications, especially in the online tools, this is what we look at for these. This is more options, more actions. And here we have choices, for instance, to copy, to move, and even to have it be something that is pinned, for instance, because we want to have some of our commonly used ones more easily accessible. From this interface here, we have recent forms, those that are pinned, ones that we want to easily refer to. And if you have team members that have shared others, that would be under shared with me. We're currently seeing this from more of a graphical perspective. And if you did have a lot of forms, however, one of the ways to change this view, in the upper right-hand corner, here we have this grid, and we could change this to a list. So explore that interface. Even if you're starting off brand new and don't have any forms at all, that is, you can see this is a fairly easy way to work and get started. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to start off by simply looking at creating a brand new form. Okay. And it's going to be based upon one that you see here called food trends. This is a really simple one. I'll just open it up so that you can see it. And in this case, you can see some of the properties of a form. We could add images to it. It could have a background color or theme. In this case, it's just a color. And it could have one or more questions with that. So in this case, then we just have one question that has multiple choices available in it. At this point, then we have options to be able to share it or to preview it to make sure that this looks the way that we want. So we're going to be building this one and several others as well. Now, most of these forms are created directly from the Forms application. But if you're working with Microsoft Teams, perhaps you've worked with the poll option, and that also used Microsoft Forms. And so from there, then we have that those will be stored here in this Forms interface. So here, what do you think of Microsoft Teams? That is actually coming from the poll app in Teams. Now, in this case, it's read-only. It can't be edited because it was not originated through this interface. It was originated through Teams. But it does give you access to that content, and it would be a way for you to be able to work with it. So let's start with a brand new form. In this case, we'll simply give this a title. So this is then what would be the purpose of it, and then we can put in a more detailed description. If you want to add an image that's relevant to that to make it a little bit more appealing, you simply can click on this option. And there's 3 different choices. We could find something through Bing. We do have to be cautious about using something that might have a copyright issue. And so preferably you find something either in OneDrive or you upload from a local location. In this case, I'll go to a Forms folder where I have a yummy picture of some desserts, because that's really what I'm going to ask about here. But that would be one of the other options. Now you're limited to 5 megabytes, but that's a fairly easy thing to find, or you can modify your images as you need. So here we have add new. These are for adding our questions. And we also will get question suggestions here. Look for this little lightning bolt based upon other forms that you have or other questions you have. But in this case, I'll simply choose choice. Now, as we explore, we have a lot of other options for questions, and you can see all of these here. So choice, text, rating, date. We also have ranking, Likert. We can offer the option to file upload and net promoter score. So the NPS. So all of these, you'll have a chance to see what they look like. In this case, I'll pick choice. We could build something. So you can see here, recommended from your past form food trends. So it's looking for or showing, suggesting that based upon what we've created before. And I could have picked that one, but as you may not already have a form to work with, then here we have, what are your favorite desserts? So when you're creating a survey or a poll, do you only want to allow them one choice? Or are multiple answers allowed? So for that, right now, these are individual choices. If I put in cake or cupcakes, then I wouldn't have the option to also choose ice cream. And lots of times I like to have both of those together. So here we have multiple answers. That changes these from radio or circular to checkboxes. And I'll add a few more options here. You can see that we could just hit enter to continue with these. There's also a plus for that if you wish. And perhaps we want to offer the option to also have an other. So in this case, I'll add that too. There's more that I could build on this, and we'll do that as we continue. But for right now, that we are set in terms of already having a form, already having something that we could share. So what do we do next? Well, it's always helpful to preview your forms. And this is an option in the upper right. Here I can preview this just to see what it looks like. Make sure that I have the text spelled correctly. I have all of my choices here. And I could even test it out. Or I could look at it from mobile. That's always a handy thing as well for viewing or reviewing these forms. We'll choose back. And at this point, then we could continue. But as you saw, we have other choices and options for a form. And I'll explore with you then those options and also then move further into the theme and our sharing choices. Let's go back to our forms then. That was a simple choice form. In this case, we're going to go ahead and build something a little bit more detailed. And let's go ahead and see what that might be. Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and look at this one as another simple survey here. And this is one that is very similar to what we had for our ice cream or our desserts. We could preview this, but let's look at that theme for a minute. So with many of your forms, one of the things that will happen is that you may see theme ideas. So because the word meeting is in the title, then I have some theme ideas there. So that's coming from artificial intelligence within Microsoft Forms. We also then have the option of being able to change the color So that would be another choice here. Now, in this case, I actually took the same image and added it as a background, but I could instead just change this to a particular color. So that would be fine too. And that's why the preview option is so helpful there. If we want to share this, and this would make sense to have it be only people in my organization likely, then that would be another option, but you could say anyone can respond. What's the purpose of the survey? What's the purpose of the form? So those are some different possibilities there. And then how are we going to share it? Probably the most likely here is that we would have a link that we might share via email, especially if it's internal, or we might drop that link into Teams. We could also have a QR code. So a QR code gives us the option to be able to have this as a choice for us that we might display in a PowerPoint presentation. So if you're presenting to prospective customers or you've provided training through various networking groups or through a conference, then you might want to have that in PowerPoint so that people could offer their feedback on the session, or this could be in printed materials. We could get the code for embedding it. So this might be, for instance, in a web page. This might be a way for you to then gather customer information that way as well. And you could also launch email directly. So those are some options that we have in working with or sharing these. Let's take this a little bit further. The ... has to do with settings. And so each one of our forms will have this available to us. And let's go to the settings. And who is going to be able to fill out the form? So it might only be people in your organization, people that share the same email. Or anyone could respond. That might be something you open up to. Once again, what's your audience? And if it's within your organization, or if you say anyone can respond, notice the differences here. Is it going to be anonymous? That would be the default if anyone can respond. Within your organization, you could record who responded. You can then just determine if only maybe someone's a really big fan of the Pizza Palace and they want to make sure that that's the option that they get. But we might limit it to one response per person. And then you'll see that there are other choices here, such as the start date and the end date. That is, when do you want this to be available and when do you want to close it? So some surveys may be a limited time, especially if there might be some sort of an incentive for it, or the purpose of the survey is time limited. And you could customize your thank you message. So if I wanted to have something a lot more kinder than your response was submitted, it might be, thanks, looking forward to seeing you. So these are some different possibilities. And do you want to get email notifications, for instance, as well? So those are some of the things to explore: preview, theme, share, and we got to the settings through the ... You can see that this is also a way to print the form if you'd like to review it in that way. So here we have one response. We'll see more of this within some other forms. So you'll be able to see a little bit more about how can you review those responses. And we can always test it out. For instance, if I go to preview here, I could test this out and that would become another response. So a really easy interface for us to work with, and an option for us in terms of how do we communicate How do we gather information from our employees, from our customers, from our prospects, from various contacts that we make? Let's explore building a more detailed form so that you have the opportunity to see what some of these different questions are like. What are some of your options there? Once again, I'll go back to forms. And from here, I'll simply start with a new form. Now, this is going to be to gather information after a training session. So for instance, we have an after event survey that comes up after these webinars. But if we didn't have that option, or if it was a different type of event, we could create our own form for this. So let's go ahead here and start building this out. Once again, we can insert an image. And in this case, I'll go ahead and upload this as something that's descriptive for that. And let's start adding our questions. Now, because I created something very similar to this, notice that we have all of these suggestions. This would not come up for you until you start building various forms. And so this is one of the things just to kind of keep in mind here. I'm going to build these from scratch, but you can see that once you start doing the work, you don't have to keep doing it over and over again. So I'll close this for right now. For this first one, what I'd like to do is add something where I can get kind of a sense of people's experience. That is, how likely they might be to recommend this course, for instance. And that is something called the Net Promoter Score. So you don't need to get too caught up in the terminology, but in this case, I'll go ahead and choose that. You've seen these before, right? Where it's a scale of 0 through 10, and then they can pick anywhere on that scale. So although it's a specific system, how can you use this for your own purposes? And in this case, this is just all I need. I don't need to make any changes to it, but we could change the content, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. So go ahead and add a new one. I'd also like to do the same idea here, but I want to gather some different information. So once again, a Net Promoter Score. And you'll probably notice a lot of that with our Microsoft applications. When there's a new feature, then it will pop up and it will tell us something new. So I don't want this question. What I want to know is, how would you rate your Excel skills? And so that means that I also want to change these questions. So from beginner to, and I just tab to go over there, to Excel Superstar. So that gives us, once again, a system or a scale for being able to gather this information. And in this case, I want to make that required. So just as other surveys and forums that you've seen, then this will not let the person continue until they complete the required options. For this next one, I want this to be a choice. And the question is, where are you located? Now, if this was something that was, it could be that you might have it be a text option where they simply put in their zip code. But if it's broader and that you serve, for instance, all of the United States, then you might want to be able to have then the different state choices listed there. Or even if you have just a list of 5 or 10 choices, rather than having to type them out, because I certainly don't want to type all the states here, what I can do instead is move to the folder where I have those states. And what I'll do then is open that up. So I have an Excel file that has all of the states, and I'll simply move to the first one, hold Shift, Control down, and Control C to copy. You could right click as well, but the whole idea here is that I have that content somewhere else. So I'll copy it and then Control V for paste. And now here we have all of the states. And so I'm able to then add those very quickly as my choices. This will create a dropdown, so don't worry about that being overwhelming in your form. But that's the idea. It might be that you have 5 different product options, or that you have other things where you do not have to type that in. So let's go ahead and continue with this form. And we'll add a date to this. In this case, we simply choose date. And there we go. And this will be, when did you take the training? I hope you're getting a sense then of the flexibility that we have with Microsoft Forms. The nice thing about this date picker is you will actually see it will actually be a clickable calendar selection. And I won't make that required, but I could. So you'll see this in the preview side of that. And let's add some other examples. In this one, I'd like this to be what's called a Likert. Now, this is basically just a table of choices. Here again, it gives you the flexibility of offering multiple options. And in this case, for instance, I might want to find out from my customers or from the people that took the training class how often they use particular Microsoft applications. Notice the artificial intelligence. As soon as I started typing how often, now I get these options here for daily, weekly, that is different choices here. Now I'm going to add them all, even though seasonal isn't something that's helpful for me. So I'll select it and delete it. But that's the idea of then creating this Likert or table that you can work with. And from here, then I'll just take a few moments to create some of those options. Now, notice one of the things that pops up here. Based upon the structure of this survey, this form, we're getting an estimated time to complete. You've likely seen these as well in different surveys. And often, so that's how I decide whether or not I want to complete it. Is it worth my time? And so this is something that we could add to the subtitle. And in this case, I'll go ahead and choose add, and notice then that means that it'll take me right up to the top here and say, I could then say estimated time is 4 minutes. So that hopefully that gives you the flexibility. I simply use Control End to get down to my last question. Here you have lots of different possibilities, and we even have a few other choices. So let's explore them. I'd also like to add a rating. Here I want to find out how satisfied they were with the training. Now, this could be more levels than 5. I think 5 is anything more than that, it starts to get a little bit wonky. And do you want a star? Do you want a number? So I'll stick with the stars. We're used to seeing that a lot more, especially with Amazon shopping and a lot of other places where this is a more common way of rating that. And once again, I could make that required, but now we'll add another one. Once again, review these different options to see what choices might make sense. Although we won't include it in the survey, file upload, that might be something that is more specific for a customer service issue or internal, and then you can actually limit it to, I want it to only be either a Word document or a PDF or a JPEG, or that is, you can be very specific about what's allowed and even what the size of them are. For this last one, we'll add text here. Okay. So what other classes would you like to see in the future? I'll switch this to a long answer just to give them more room for that. But those are some of your choices. How can you take advantage of those? By leveraging Microsoft Forms. We're going to make a couple adjustments to this. I'll show you then as well, once again, our share options, how we can review results, and even how we can use some of these forms in other applications. So I have this first question I had, how likely are you to recommend this? And this one, I'd like to move it down. So we can see that this might be something that I want to move more towards the bottom. Notice with it selected, I could also delete it. I could copy it if there's something similar with it. But I'll continue moving this down so that it is then near the bottom of my form. So that is one of the options. That is that flexibility of being able to move these or to make these adjustments. Another type of option that you have with a question, and let's say perhaps it might make more sense if we looked at our state question. There might be certain things that are related to whatever they selected. That is, if they're in Wyoming, there might be something different that I want to use for that, or other choices. So actually, I'll just come back to this one, make it a little easier to see. The ... there's something called branching. So although we won't explore it in this training, know that it means that if I make particular selections, maybe if it was a question about demographics, if it was about location, there might be branching to say, well, if they say no to an answer, then I'm going to have them skip the next 3 choices. As maybe it's a question to say, are you a homeowner? And if you say no, then I don't want to ask any other questions related to being a homeowner, and we'll skip and move to the next area. So that is something called branching, probably something you've experienced in various forms yourself. So that's another idea here. Another choice that we have, and is that when we have longer surveys, when we have longer questions, we could add something called a section. And this is, well, kind of a type of question. It's really just a way to divide them up. And so what the question is then, what the section is that so this is then going to be another page. And so that's the way that this behaves. And in this case, then I'm going to move it. Okay, actually, I'll go ahead and cancel. I don't want to move the questions there, but I can actually move this section around above, or I might add it before I have these questions here. So I'll show you what a section looks like later. So right now, I'll go ahead and remove it. But that's the idea too. That is, you can make these easier for people to use and to work with. Let's take a moment and look at the options for a theme, and then explore what happens or what it looks like when we have various responses. So once again, as we saw with the simpler form, we can go to a theme. And based upon some of the terminology there, with this said, oh, training or group there, I could pick a particular theme here. We may not always see options for that, or we could just pick a particular color. So know that those are some possibilities in terms of how it looks. How will this look for someone that has received this? So in this case, then, this is a preview. And you can see lots of different possibilities. And we could even test it. That is, we could even click on this to see how this works. And I could see maybe I need to go in there and edit and take that one out. But here's my date options. So here again, really easy for me to be able to work with. See how easy, and so how helpful that would be. And I could even submit this. Now it will actually go in as part of my results. Now I could see this. See, notice how that even shows how that looks from a mobile perspective. And once again, I could preview and see the entire form. So I think very intuitive working with Microsoft Forms. Hopefully this is giving you lots of different ideas about how you might be able to work with it. Our share options, covered those briefly before. And once again, I might say anyone can respond because this is perhaps external, and we have these various ways to be able to work with it. One of the things I would recommend is just creating a simple form that you share with some colleagues, get a chance to kind of test it out, see how it works, how interactive it was, get their feedback on it to see how well that might work for you. Let's go back to forms. So I'm just simply in the upper left-hand corner here. This is moving me back to my front end, my interface for Microsoft Forms. And from here, then, let's look at a similar survey that has some responses. And here is my super fantastic Microsoft Excel training. You can see that it has some of those same choices. Let's preview this for just a moment because I want you to see here. Same idea, just customized a little bit differently. Let's review these responses. So you'll see this tab here. As you receive responses, this will start to accumulate. You can set it up so that you can ask under settings if you want to receive, we saw that earlier, Do I want to get email notification? It all just depends upon how often you might have these kinds of feedback. But this is a form where we've had some responses. So a couple different ways to review it. First of all, overall, we get these details. For the NPS, for that promoter score, this means something different. It's a proprietary one. So I would say don't be too concerned about how these things are being labeled. It all has to do with where someone selects there. But if they're rating their skills as a beginner, that's not necessarily a negative. It's just in the score, it would be seen as someone that's non-responsive, basically. But you can then see where are they located. It's even can map that out for us. What were the dates that they used? How often they use those applications? All of this can be helpful for you to gather information. You often can learn things that you might not have been familiar with, things that you didn't know about those particular customers, or information about your product offerings, things along those lines. So that's an overview. If we view results, now we can actually go through and see what the individual answers were. And explore these. These were all anonymous. We didn't ask for their name, but that might be something that we gather depending upon the purpose. Sometimes that's an optional text box for contact if people want to receive additional follow-up. So we evaluate these options, and once again, we can go back. So pretty straightforward there. We also have the option to open all of these answers here in an Excel file. So that becomes another possibility. And now we can sort that information, especially if we have a lot of it. We might sort that or filter to be able to see how this can be helpful to us. So that's the idea of exploring and working with Microsoft Forms. We'll wrap up. I'll show you how to create a simple quiz, as this might not be something that is such a common application, but there might be ways, as like I mentioned, for onboarding people or follow-up for a training class. There might be some ways where that would be a helpful way of being able to test someone's understanding and being able to work with it. And then I'll briefly show you how Forms integrates with our other applications. So that's what we have coming up. Let's go back to Forms. And if we did want to create a quiz, through this dropdown, we choose New Quiz. The biggest difference is that by default, there's only one response per person. You can add comments next to answers to help people to say, no, this is, no, yay, good job, or no, an explanation, for instance, for that particular answer. As you'll see, you can add points and you can pick what are the correct answers. So for this one, let's just assume that this was from that Microsoft Excel class. Because Microsoft Forms looks at a survey, a poll, a quiz is all a form, it's helpful in your titles to name them in a way that it will be easier to find them later. And let's go ahead here and add. Now, one of the things, as I mentioned before, that is that it would require or record your name. So that was one of the things that would be by default. because, because it shares a common name. Once again, it's showing us these different possibilities. So in this case, I'll go ahead and add these, but I want you to see that you could add others as well. So you're just adding these as choices. For this first one, there's only one answer possible. And I've specified that this is the correct answer. And notice that next to each one of these, then I could put in a message to say, you know, there are almost twice as many, or something along those lines. So in this case, this is not a correct answer, but I could have a comment with that. The correct answer here is marked with a checkbox, and then there could be a comment. So this is a way to review results. Here again, I can put in points. So that's the distinction with a quiz. And then once again, I have another question. In this case, it's multiple answers, and I'm indicating which one of these would be correct. So we could continue building on this idea. But that's the sense, once again, of with a quiz, we have a few more features, but it's still a form. Let's preview this briefly. And you can see here that is, if I pick this one, it won't tell us right away, but let's just say that I pick just these two and I submit. Now I can view the results and notice it will tell me, first of all, I have 5 out of 10 points because I missed the second one. And it will tell me which ones were correct. So I can see what would be wrong here. And as I mentioned, that can be a really helpful way to test skills and options. I can't run this again because it's set up to only allow for one option for that. But if I reviewed my answers, we can see that it automatically takes it from whatever the login is, or someone's email address, and here are my results. So that's all we'll look at in terms of quizzes, because those are probably less likely to be tools that you'll work with. But let's briefly touch on a couple other ways that you might see forms. And one would be through Outlook. So in Outlook here, I'm going to send out an email, and what I'd like to find out here is, where do you want to go to lunch? Lunch options, and I'll choose insert and poll. So this will launch Microsoft Forms within Outlook, which is a really nice option. And now this is certainly something we could do in Teams, but I'll go ahead and we're making this a little bit more formal. Might be also a way to send a really quick poll of other people, partners, clients, and I allow multiple answers, these kinds of things. And then we choose next. So this is what it looks like. I could even vote. But in this case, I'll add it to the email. So what would happen is that this would end up, let's try that again. It just needed to know the login, just logged into so many different places. And so with this then, they would have this clickable link that would then take them to that poll. That's one way. Another way that we can work with it is through Teams. So you've likely have created these, or seen them at least. That is, we start a conversation. And if you don't already have forms in that. You can go to the ... and then actually type in forms and have it then be a form that you can create directly from a team conversation. So I've already added that. It's already part of my conversation, but I wouldn't have to. And you can see how this would come up in the same way that we've seen before. So you just simply build that simple poll. Here's an example of it. What do you think of it? Teams is amazing. I'll submit the vote. And then here we have those responses. So this becomes then another way for you to be able to work with these tools from your different Microsoft applications. Some of the other applications that also support forms include PowerPoint. Right now, it would be that you can add a poll in a slideshow, but it's not dynamic. So you can't poll audience members, for instance. It would be something if you were sharing that slideshow, maybe once again, like maybe an onboarding situation. And Excel for the web or online has an option to create a form directly from the application. So it still has full integration. The advantage is you would see the responses automatically. Down the road, we expect to see that forms feature also in Excel desktop. So those are some of the options that you have in terms of working with forms. There we go. I hope this has been a helpful overview of what's possible in terms of working with Microsoft Forms. We invite you to join us next month for our next webinar on Microsoft Word, Simplifying and Organizing Long Documents. How can you create a table of contents? How can you create consistent formatting? What are some quick and easy ways to navigate? That is, how can you save time when you're working with those longer documents in Microsoft Word? And then in June is our session for Microsoft Excel and linking and sharing data. Here there'll be lots of different techniques for being able to link within workbooks, across workbooks, and other options for sharing data so that once again, you can save time and actually make it easier for you to analyze your data. So those are some of our options coming up. And we thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to be able to help you to be able to be more productive. Let us know how we can be of help to you. Please reach out to us for IT services and consulting to support you with your Microsoft technologies. It's been a pleasure to help you to be more productive with your Microsoft technologies, and thank you for joining us.